This is a part of a larger series where I look at each of the Traveller's Tales LEGO video games. For more context, please check out the playlist linked in the description below. We're off to a significantly better start. Being an adaptation of the Star Wars saga removes a lot of the motivational requirements for the player. You are performing tasks because they happened within the concept of what this is adapting. That is the shallowest level of this iceberg, and it's already deeper than anything Bionicle Heroes gave me. Along with this, the game promises that we can walk around the sets of the original and prequel trilogies as iconic Star Wars characters, but in LEGO form. Keeping in mind that Bionicle took place in a completely new setting that departed from its own IP, this is already a massive step up thanks to the lowest requirement this game needs to meet to be a passable product under the premise of LEGO Star Wars, is to allow players to walk around those aforementioned sets. That's not to say this simply being a Star Wars product makes it a good product. The last few decades should have taught you that much. What I'm trying to say is that LEGO Star Wars passes the pretty fireworks test. Not a high bar, but that's why I said this was the lowest requirement. Of course, there is something else that I should probably discuss at this point, and that's the version of the game you're currently seeing. If you've seen the length of this video, then you'll have a good idea of what I'm doing here. This will cover LEGO Star Wars 1, 2, and the complete saga. Simply put, there are some differences between each title, and whilst the complete saga is a compilation of the first two titles, it also has a number of changes that are worth talking about by itself. Truth is, regardless of whether or not my intention was to cover the original two games, I would have had to for the sake of comparison. If I were to discuss any remaster, remake, or port of a game, I'd at least cover the base title first. The reason for that is thanks to the added layer of criticism such a product creates. Is the complete saga a remaster, remake, or a port of the original two titles, for instance? And if so, is it an improvement or a downgrade overall? That isn't to say that I disapprove of others reviewing just the complete saga. It should stand up on its own after all. This is more of a choice I made out of preference, and to avoid the criticism that I've skipped over a title. That being said, I will be talking about these games one at a time with comparisons running sequentially. It will make more sense when I get started, so allow me to do just that. Beginning with the original LEGO Star Wars, it's worth noting that this is the first entry in Traveller's Tales' LEGO series. It's also more in line with the formula they're known for, which is something I'll explore in more depth as the series goes on. LEGO Star Wars covers the prequel trilogy, something which had yet to be fully released by the time the game was released. I'll cover that a little more later on, so for now let's talk about how this game looks. There's good news and bad news. The good news is that I can actually tell what I'm looking at now, as the filters and bloom that plagued my experience with Bionicle Heroes aren't here. LEGO Star Wars has the added benefit of trying to adapt the likeness of various sets for each of its levels, whereas Bionicle moved away from its source material. The result is a fairly consistent art direction, which does come with a caveat. That being the bad news. Once again, we have a game that's adapting things with LEGO visually, but not committing fully to the idea. Much like Bionicle, it can be hard to tell what's interactive or a part of the environment as a result, except there's another layer to this now. The art style of the Star Wars franchise. Instead of going for the realistic approach like in Bionicle, I promise that's my last comparison to that, there's a wealth of on-screen media to take and adapt. But then that barrier is created between LEGO and Star Wars rather than a complete merging of the two types. I get the intention to make only LEGO items interactive, but that's not always the case, which brings me onto the visual side of the new abilities and powers. A faint glow or symbol will appear to inform that the player can use their character's abilities, however it will only show up if you've selected the right character, and even then it's not guaranteed. The only indicator I found to be consistent was for the grappling ability, because it doesn't require the player to be within its proximity. Using the Force, on the other hand, is temperamental. You have to be facing exactly near the item that can be used with the Force, along with being close enough to interact with it. Even then, this isn't reliable because of the game's shoddy auto-lock-on, which seems to be based around whatever's closest. But once again, that's not entirely accurate. So there's yet another mixed bag going on here. But There is one thing I can say with confidence, and that's how good the character models look. It's hard to screw up taking your pre-existing LEGO figures and translating them into a rig for a video game character, and Traveller's Tales pretty much hit the nail on the head with this one. I think it helps that these characters actually exist within these settings instead of actors roaming around semi-dated CGI sets that tended to muddle with the depth of the scene a little too much for me. I oddly believe that these little figurines are actually on these planets more so than their live-action counterparts. As for the gameplay loop, things are significantly easier to discuss this time around. The original LEGO Star Wars game is quite bare bones compared to its sequels, but I didn't find that to be a bad thing. With this game covering each prequel film, we have 6 levels for The Phantom Menace, 5 for Attack of the Clones, and 6 for Revenge of the Sith. Each episode has its share of standard levels, vehicle levels, and boss levels. There are also 2 modes for each level, except for vehicle levels, those being Story Mode and Free Mode. Story Mode has you playing as the characters that relate to the scene, the levels adapting, and Free Mode has you being able to choose from any character you've unlocked, either through playing the story missions or purchasing them through Dexter's shop. The context of the standard levels are disappointing. Yeah, this isn't going to take long to break down because the reality of this game is that it's just not intellectually engaging. You may argue that it's a LEGO game, so what were you expecting? But I don't consider that to be an excuse, and as far as I'm aware, there might be a really decent LEGO video game with gameplay that actually tests the player, instead of doing what this game does. The standard levels see you traversing one side of a set piece to the other. There are next to no puzzles in this game, with most roadblocks consisting of interact with everything and it will work. If you're ever stuck, there's a good chance that by simply destroying everything you can, you'll find the way forwards. Each character has 4 hearts, and once those hearts are used up, you will lose some of your studs, this game's collectible currency. It takes only a moment before you pop back into the world, allowing you to gather up what you've lost, but there's an issue that comes with this. Studs are used at Dexter's shop to purchase more characters or extra abilities. It's not hard to rack up a decent amount of studs just by playing casually, which means that sooner or later you can get the invincibility extra, preventing you from dying unless you drop off the ledge. Even then, you won't lose your studs anymore, making this already easy game trivial. So the best way to give the player a challenge would be to keep the invincibility extra off, right? Well, we're reaching subjective territory here. Just to repeat myself for a moment, with studs, you can purchase characters, extras, and hints. Each level is designed to be played twice over, one with story-relevant characters and one in free play for this game's collectibles. The issue is that second playthrough. The hunt for collectibles only requires the player to have the group you unlock naturally by playing through the story mode and a single Sith. Darth Maul only costs 15,000 studs, something which you can easily obtain in a single level without batting an eye. After that, every other purchasable thing bears no objective purpose outside of the invincibility extra and the mini-kit detector, which I'll talk about in a moment. So you're purchasing other characters for the sake of the player wanting to. That's not to say there aren't any differences between how the characters play, and I think that pointing out their types will reveal that. Starting with Negotiations, the first level from The Phantom Menace, we play as Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Both are Jedi, and both have their own set of animations. Their purpose, however, is identical. They can perform a basic combo with their lightsabers, both time the same, so the only difference is the visual aspect. They can perform a jump attack, and their ground pound attack. They can also do a double jump and use the force on objects that glow appropriately. Considering this is in part a co-op game, as the press start icon likes to remind you, then having 2 types of the same character class makes sense. Droidekas provide a use for the ground pound outside of its large damage output. This is due to their shields, which can be disabled instantly with a single use of its attack. The next unlockable character is TC-14, who is a protocol droid. They're slow, can't attack or jump, however TC-14 can be used to unlock doors with a protocol droid symbol on. Once again, they have their own walking animation, only this one isn't unique to TC-14, as I'll point out soon enough. Moving on to Invasion of Naboo, we unlock Jar Jar Binks, who is one of the most useful characters in the game, especially for free play mode, hunting collectibles. His double jump is significantly higher than any other character in the game, and considering that he can't attack, this is his only purpose. Escape from Naboo introduces Queen Amidala and Captain Panaka, who are both blaster users. They can only jump once, however their ranged attacks can reach across the screen before an enemy is aggroed. Along with this, their fire rate far outdoes the swing of a lightsaber, making them superior in battle. The only stumbling block is shields and lightsaber users themselves, which are both uncommon. They can also grapple up to higher areas when standing on the relevant symbol. Finally, Retake Feed Palace gives you R2-D2 and Anakin Skywalker. R2-D2 is an astromech, which means he can move faster than a protocol droid while serving the same purpose of unlocking marked panels. That being said, R2-D2 can deactivate and stun enemies, along with having a short hover that can be used to clear gaps characters can't jump over. Anakin's trait is that he's short, meaning that he can climb through designated shafts to reach areas others can't. That's it. So in total, the Phantom Menace offers the player 2 Jedi, 1 protocol droid, Jar Jar Binks, 3 blaster users, 4 if you count a reskin of Padme, an astromech droid, and a child. Contextually, it all fits, and the levels are designed to support their playstyles. However, what I've just described is it. All of the classes you need to play any level in this game have been given to the player, and there are barely any variations on them. I believe that outside of the animations, the visual distraction of each character, there's a minimal amount of variety here, and that extends throughout story mode. In fact, some of the characters' unique animations or overall uselessness annoyed me more than it was worth including them. Yoda instantly comes to mind, a slow walker with his walking stick until he pulls out his lightsaber. The gimmick of his facade is fine enough, but by adapting his bouncy frog-like hops from the films, I found him to be confusing and at times frustrating to control. He makes up for this with his speed in battle, but maneuvering him into battle was the issue. The walking speed is too slow, something that's done intentionally to contrast with Yoda's lightsaber form, but that form is too unwieldy. It's the issue of an adaptation. Staying as true to his prequel counterpart as possible has transformed Yoda into a difficult character to play as, yet alone recommend outside of the gimmick. This is sort of rectified later on when he gains a hover chair, but I couldn't really consistently switch between each mode. Holding down a button or pressing a specific button seems to do a trick, but I couldn't tell you reliably which one it is or which method works. Sometimes he gets into his chair, other times he'll just do nothing. Then we can move on to characters like Chancellor Palpatine, who actually do nothing but walk. They're here because they were in the film. It's at this point where I'll bring up the idea of whether staying true to the source material is always worth it, because whilst there is a lot of love that's gone into this game, I think it's a little odd that Traveller's Tales decided to stop at just the core cast of characters and use a fairly static class system for each of them. Remembering that this was released at a time where every background cast member got their own action figure, I see no reason other than memory space to either add more obscure characters into the mix, or at least the abilities and actions of the ones we already have. Qui-Gon is a Jedi Master whilst Obi-Wan is still a Padawan. Maybe showcase this by doing something as simple as having Qui-Gon's Force abilities be a little faster. Even have a unique animation showing something more distinct, like Qui-Gon visually pulling off the same feats as Obi-Wan effortlessly, whilst Obi-Wan still strains slightly. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I can't think of a reason as to why each character can't be a little more situational outside of their classes, which brings me on to the level design itself. The release of this game does predate Bionicle Heroes, so it shouldn't come as a shock that most of my complaints in regards to Traveller's Tales' approach to the levels is similar. As previously mentioned, you walk from one side of a level to the other whilst pressing the interact button when a roadblock appears. If you can't find something to interact with, then destroying the environment will always reveal something you can interact with. Rinse and repeat with the exceptions of the vehicles and boss levels. Paths to optional areas are always obvious given that there will be something you can't interact with whilst playing with the story mode characters. Enemies are fodder that go down with either a single hit or after a combo. Combat is always one-on-one, and I'm a little thrown off by this. It makes sense for the ranged characters to only target a single enemy, but in the levels like Defense of Kashyyyk, you will encounter a large number of enemies as a lightsaber user, and will still have to take them on one at a time unless you keep ground pounding. Whilst attacking as a lightsaber user, you will deflect blaster fire automatically instead of dealing damage, making combat go by even slower, eventually prompting the player into using the ground pound. It deals a lot of damage but leaves the player vulnerable to incoming attacks unless you use the invincibility extra. Once again, you may say that I should simply turn this off, but the extra isn't hard to unlock and there's no downside to using it. It does make the game extremely trivial, but what I'm trying to point out is how trivial the game is even without it. I mean, take it this way, if you put off collecting the extras that result in a simple gag or characters that perform the same tasks the story mode characters already do, then studs become meaningless. As such, the penalty for death becomes meaningless. The basis of gameplay outside of the main objective, walking from A to B, is the combat, as that's now a time waster much like the interactable objects throughout the game that are required to proceed. Let's discuss the vehicle and boss levels before proceeding to the optional content because this won't take long. Vehicle levels are on rails and come in three flavours: pod racing from the Phantom Menace, flying a gunship in Attack of the Clones, and flying a Jedi Starfighter from Revenge of the Sith. Pod racing is a simple race where you have to optimise your usage of the boost pads to reach the end of a section of the track before the timer runs out. It's by far the most challenging aspect of the entire game, and I love it. If you fail by crashing into something or don't make it in time, you reset at a previous checkpoint, forcing the player to think about the track's layout. It also means that the level has an excuse to go as batshit as it wants because of how short each section is. If you fail, you're only sent back a few seconds, so it's a game of memorization. There are 3 laps in total, and each section becomes increasingly difficult by throwing more obstacles your way. The raiders shooting at you, parts of the track falling away and changing, boulders rolling in your way, and mines scattered about the place. The penalty is minor still, but you actually have to use your brain to overcome what the game is throwing at you. The gunship section is apparently infamous, and I'm not entirely sure why. Instead of it being a race, the level is an auto-scroller with lasers, mines, and enemies in your way. Movement is tight and precise, making avoiding the lasers extremely fair. Once again, a checkpoint system is implemented, allowing the obstacles to be as many as the game wants, but they're always placed in a position that I found easy to read before having to deal with. It's all about dealing with the most immediate threat, and not getting overwhelmed. Having moving enemies combined with the lasers presents the challenge of positioning, which is doubly so when gunning down the mines amidst everything else. The level ramps things up by adding more of each as well as making the path ahead narrower. If I had to make a complaint, it would be that I found it a little difficult to gauge the distance of the gunship lasers, or rather depth of them, as it seemed like my attacks would fly over the things I was aiming at. There's a second section to this level where you have to take out the lasers guarding several generators, but the principle's the same. Finally, there's the Jedi Starfighter level, which is an on-rail shooter. Dodge the laser fire, gun down or avoid the approaching enemies, and shoot the red buttons to proceed through the ship debris. It's nowhere near as involving as the previous vehicle levels, however it's a step above the normal levels simply because of that checkpoint system. Dying means that you're set back, so you actually have to pay attention to what's on screen. Other than that, there's no complexity behind avoiding most things as the autoscroller deals with most of that. Shooting the red buttons is your only priority and that's about it. Finally, we have the boss levels. They're like normal levels except there's an enemy with a big health bar. Lightsaber users can be defeated in much the same way as shield users. In other words, ground pound them into dust with little to no thought. General Grievous and Anakin at least require you to navigate an arena in between the fight, but you're still not using your brain to accomplish anything here. The Anakin fight has the gimmick of platforming and fighting the second player. There's a checkpoint system for the boss due to the level being on a timer, which at least has you needing to perform actions you normally would under pressure. I don't think the level design is anything nearly as involving as the pod racing or gunship levels, so you're still performing mundane tasks without much thought other than getting it done fast. Having the second player be the level's boss means that you yourself have a large health bar at the end, and in free play you can use different characters to your advantage. It also means that you can switch to Jar Jar and change character to confuse the AI when starting the section. The story mode of this game is a dull affair. You really are here to just look at the Star Wars prequels in LEGO form, and it's unfortunate that this game provides little outside of that, with the occasional bright sparks here and there. There is another light to view this in, and that's from the player's want to gain the collectibles. It's subjective, and that's the biggest hurdle. I've already broken down the objective benefits for going after the optional content in this game, and it's not great. Say that you personally wanted to go after these objectives for the sake of doing them, I don't have great news for you, but it's a little better than the base game. There are 2 major side objectives in each level: collect 10 canisters and reach True Jedi. The first is best to do in free play mode, as those optional branches I talked about contain canisters. They're not too hard to find, and more often than not, will have you doing the exact same thing you've been doing in the base game. The challenge isn't really a challenge, it's using the ability to select a character who can perform an action the story mode characters can't. In essence, it's locking out the player's ability to do something and forcing them through a second playthrough to accomplish that. It's the same thing as Vezin's Masks from Bionicle Hero. Instead of challenging the player and testing their knowledge of the game's mechanics, you're selecting the right character and proceeding as normal. Reaching True Jedi is a little more engaging if you're not using the invincibility extra. Essentially, you have to handicap yourself to make this part a challenge. You want to collect as many studs as possible without dying, as death results in the True Jedi meter dropping. This means that you want to avoid this game's fail states. This unfortunately also means that the slow one-on-one process of lightsaber fights is recommended unless you're using a ranged character. It's a gamble, but the process of needing to collect studs means that you're actually having to explore a level and do what you've been doing in the base game, just a whole lot more of it. Okay, so going after these isn't great. You're not doing anything new, and what you were already doing isn't incredibly involving outside of moving a character and interacting with what's in front of you the same way to proceed. So what's the reward for all of this? Oh boy! Collecting all of the canisters will give you a model you can look at, and True Jedi unlocks another level based on A New Hope with the purpose of getting lots of studs! So the canisters are primarily for bragging rights, and True Jedi, which you obtain by collecting a load of studs, unlocks a mission for you to gain even more studs. You unlock Darth Vader, a stormtrooper, and the ability to buy Princess Leia after completing the short level, but looking at this objectively, you're unlocking another lightsaber force user and 2 more blaster users. You're completing these for one reason and one reason alone: because it's Star Wars. It's the firework factor again. Ooh, look at that shiny Star Wars. Let's wrap this part up. I should start the section by saying that I like the game. Unfortunately, my likes aren't indicative of what classes as good, because that would make me an idiot. Upon replaying this game, it's not great. It serves the same button mashing mindlessness that crossed over into the Bionicle Heroes game, except with a Star Wars skin on top. And at the end of the day, that's why this is still remembered. That, and because Revenge of the Sith wasn't out yet. Yeah, this game follows an earlier draft of Revenge of the Sith script, hence the cloaked clones and extended opening scene. It's a time capsule of a game, and in that respect, there's some merit to playing this for that purpose. I'm not entirely sure I'd say that the gameplay side of things works out though. Seeing things as simple as the Caminos dancing when I fix up their dance pad is adorable, and the cutscenes are worth the time alone. Forcing everyone to Looney Tunes the plot of the prequel trilogy adds so much novelty and charm that using voiced lines from the films could never replace. Qui-Gon's death forever lives in my brain because of the simply childish and innocent way Traveller's Tales had to convey it in this format. For that alone, I'd say check out this, but the hurdle, that being the gameplay itself, might be too big of an ask. There's a chance that the complete saga will render this irrelevant and improve upon the fundamental flaw, but there's only one way to find out. Until then, it's time to move on to the next entry.